Okay, it's great to see everybody. Uh, Happy Native American Heritage Month. Next week, we will have a short week, I believe. So we will only have class on Monday. And I know on the syllabus it says uh, that we are looking at communication and language program, but I don't even know what that is. I put it on the syllabus. I found it somewhere. Where did there was some other program that I heard about, and I was going to have us look into some sort of method. So we're kind of starting to move from methods to sort of programs. So when we start talking about dual language programs and we start talking about adult immersion and we start talking about language medium, that's kind of a bit of a bigger thing than a singular methodology. Like I don't think you could have an entire school that's sort of built off of TPR or accelerated second language acquisition. But you could have an entire school that's a language medium school or that's a dual language school. So they're a little bit different. And I want to make sure I may have missed one. So let me make sure. So let me share my screen with you folks. So what we're looking at here is the Paul Creek method. We're going to talk about that on Wednesday. And does everybody have everything they need, or is anybody interested in also doing a little bit of digging on this one in case you haven't gone yet, or if you want to go again? We might be, Lori's going to do a video and then we'll just sort of have a dialogue. And folks in Atlin are using this method for teaching Tlingit. But if nobody wants to sort of do a little bit extra, it's totally fine. I can. And then there was one I forgot to put on here. So I need to go 11:29. And this will be the mentor-apprentice program, or I think it's the master-apprentice program. Anybody want to look into that one? Okay, I could do that one, I guess. So as far as the classes we have left, this is what it's kind of what we're doing. Let me show you folks the syllabus. So we have, today we're sort of reviewing this Learn in Beauty reading, Situational Navajo, and the Maori Adult Total Immersion in New Zealand. And we're just going to talk about sort of like some of these programs and what they might have going on. The idea is to sort of look around at other language programs. And so I would say if I think of language programs worldwide, Maori, Hawaiian, Navajo, Ojibwe, Gaelic, Sami, those are ones that sort of come to mind. Welsh, just in terms of what they've been able to do, and probably also Hebrew. And then just sort of like thinking of looking at these languages and what they have done, and then thinking about the language that you're working in and what you might be able to do. I think it's really beneficial to look at that because there might be some things that you might not be able to do just yet. And for a lot of these programs, whenever you look at them, like especially I'd always remind myself when I go to Hawaii that what I'm looking at is not something we're trying to do tomorrow, but it could be something we could do over the next 30 years. So when I was studying with those folks, they really encouraged us to look at to develop a 30-year vision. And I want to talk about this 30-year vision a little bit today. But first of all, we're looking on Wednesday at the Paul Creek method. We're looking on Monday, we're just going to sort of chat. We're just going to sort of start thinking about all these different programs. And also, I'm going to ask you a series of questions and stuff and really start guiding us towards your final individual papers, which I want to talk about today as well. And then, so for whatever I wrote here on the 22nd of November, just forget it. I'll try and find what it was. If anybody knows what I was talking about when I wrote this, let me know. But I didn't put the master-apprentice program in black. Like these ones, they should all be in black. And so I forgot to put that on the list. So unless anybody wants to sign up and do that one, I could probably go ahead and take the lead. And we'll just talk about what the master-apprentice program is. And I'll certainly share my experiences, primarily with Tlingit, but also just hanging out a little bit with some folks who have done this as well, and then also trying to set it up with a variety of languages. And sort of, I'll share with you folks some of the things that we tried to do and some of the things that were pretty rough in terms of trying to get them accomplished. Then we're looking at the Adult Immersion Program on December 1st. I'm primarily thinking about Mohawk, but I know there's also the Salish program. I think I sent you folks information about that. Let me know if I didn't. Then we're looking at dual language education, and that one is pretty much looking at Navajo and their schools as a model. Language medium education, I would say primarily we're looking at Hawaii and Aotearoa as examples there, but also Ojibwe. Then we are meeting on the 13th, just to sort of maybe do a question and answers period and just sort of a chat and just check in with how our final projects are coming along. And I want to talk about the final projects today. But before I do that, any thoughts or questions about how we're going to move towards wrapping up the class? Anything that you've been thinking about in terms of language revitalization, thoughts you wanted to share, questions you want to ask?
I applied for a position with Doyon Foundation, and it's to manage a mentor apprenticeship program with an ANA grant they got. And I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm pretty unfamiliar with managing a mentor apprenticeship program, so any insight on that would be helpful. I'm going to choose.
Great. Yeah, and we could talk now, but we could probably also like smash through a whole bunch on that 29th classroom. And so, yeah, I'll share some things. Leanne Hinton literally wrote the book on it. She's a really amazing person. She came up here to Juneau during our clan conference and spent about an extra week or so with some of us. And it was really great to just sort of talk to her. And then we implemented it here. I believe Alice Taff used to teach classes here and also with Dekenog, trying to sort of figure out how to run some master apprentice programs both here and there. And then I helped Yakutat when they had theirs. And so we'll definitely talk about, like, I think probably my number one piece of advice is do all your English over the phone. And so that you set up, if you have a master apprentice session, that you basically, the mentor will call, the apprentice will call the master and just sort of make a plan. And then once you get there, you don't do any English. So use the telephone as your sort of tool to help with that. And the biggest thing is probably trying to keep them from speaking English. And so let's actually share some strategies for a second. Like, let's say you're coordinating some sort of language immersion event or some sort of language gathering or some sort of online hangout or some sort of master apprentice program. how are you going to keep people from speaking English? Let's talk about ideas. It means you guys got to talk.
I know one thing right off the bat I've noticed in immersion sessions is try not to ask wasa do wasak cup like or Tlingit. Don't ask how do you say and then English word in Tlingit because it puts the elder speaker on the spot, and I've seen them start to doubt themselves and get nervous, and then they switch entirely into English. So I've noticed that that's one thing you don't want to do.
It is very easy to complain in English or just to like go off in English about like, oh, I would totally do immersion, but we don't have, if there was only a kitchen over there, I would do immersion all day. Oh, you know what? I'd do immersion, but there's this noise, right? There's always these reasons, which, because it is hard. Uh, I remember one time, I just remember this time where there was this group of us that were committed to doing immersion, which included a whole group of elders, whole group of learners. And we started noticing like if we could just make it to an hour, then and that hour it seemed like it'd take forever. Time is so interesting because sometimes like it seems like you're like, okay, has it been an hour? And you look at your watch like it's been 5 minutes, right? And so it just goes by so slow, but then other times it goes by really, really fast. And so but then I noticed like the more we did it, the easier it sort of became. And so I do think you got to have a whole bunch of stuff for people to do and stuff that they can manage and try and keep people from trying to get too complex with their language, which is really, I guess some of the big things is like, what do people like to talk about and how do we get them to talk about that? And then how do we get them to use the language? So sometimes you go in with a whole bunch of, you could do a bunch of prep work, you could do a bunch of stuff. And then you could sort of move in and out of these immersion sessions. And another big thing that we had was sometimes I don't know if it's a nice thing, and maybe it's just being nice, but we want everybody there, which is wonderful. But then sometimes if you're trying to have everybody there, then you're trying to do everything for everybody, and maybe people don't know the language like at all, and they're coming to a language immersion, and so you feel bad for them, and so you just sort of stop. But then you lose this. A lot of our languages, you don't have very many opportunities once you get speakers together. So you have to engage those speakers, and you have to be, you know, you also don't want to bring, like to bring a speaker there, it's sort of like you invite some Olympic gymnast or something to come be with you and then watch you guys do jumping jacks all day. So sometimes they're just watching you do like little drills and stuff. So then there's got to be this balance of how do you get them to start talking? Because I've also seen events where like an elder gets paid to talk and they show up and then they say, well, there's only two people here going to understand what I say, so why? But then also just to try and get to those agreement sections where you can. And so having some bite-sized chunks, but then also some big meals that are there. And sometimes, and I know we've talked about this a little bit, sometimes you got to create two separate spaces, a space for the learners and a space for the speakers, and let them pick. And I think if you can, don't use the word immersion. I just think it's associated with some sort of, well, I saw a lot of folks who they should be at some sort of language gathering. But as soon as you call an immersion, they're like, I'm not ready. I'm not going to go. I'm not ready. I don't want to do it. Because it seems like there's some sort of assessment that's involved or some sort of performance that's involved that gets people really scared. So if there's some way that you can say, I think what we did in our last one, we said, okay, if you want to learn, there's lessons. If you want to talk, there's conversations. That's it. Let's pick them. Go to one. But then just say, okay, once we start though, the conversations, we're not going to be using English over here. And so, you want to make sure that you have those spaces and not just say like, this is only for the hardcore, but then to say like, there's important stuff that needs to happen here. And if we don't get to these full language environments, these elders are not going to talk. And if they're not going to talk, we're not going to get this like critical information from them. And they need to hear us and we need to hear them so that we can do a lot of self-correcting and adjustments. But then there should be opportunities for the learners, and then there should be opportunities for everybody to do stuff together. But I have hurt people's feelings before, and it's not fun. But then you'll be put into these environments where it's like becomes your responsibility to make sure that we are using the language. But then sometimes, you can only tell them so many times. No English, no English, no. However you say it in your language. Like I've been there. I've been the one who says it, and I've been in the room too when someone else has had to say it. And so trying to get them to switch over can be a real challenge. What else? What else you folks can do? What are your strategies and your tools?
This is Sonny. I like your idea about breaking them up into smaller groups and then bringing them together for the larger group activity. Sometimes it's less intimidating and it's more encouraging to be able to be in a small group, and you're bouncing the language back and forth rather than having a teacher talk at you. Because it's really, not to say this is happening this class, so I like the way we're able to talk and brainstorm and go back and forth. But sometimes, you just hear someone talk and your mind will just drift off after 20 minutes of talking. So it's just typical. But being able to brainstorm and solve and problem solving, whatever it is, and working on different activities, I think that really helps you to, even if you don't understand, you can read the sign language and you can get a pretty good idea. And then that narrows the pool of words that you might be thinking might be the right word. And so you have a better chance when you have that pool of words to kind of go through. So I like that. I like mini activities. So whatever it is, so students can use their hands and actually use that to help remember too. But thank you. I just wanted to say I like that. Smaller groups.
Yeah, and trying to break it up sometimes. And so sometimes you've got like basically a group of learners and a group of folks that are going to be conversing. And then I think it's real important to say, go where you want. Go where you feel comfortable. So that if someone comes in and they're pretty new, you don't want to look at them and be like, oh, maybe you shouldn't be in the conversations. You should be in the lessons, because then that could just have a negative impact. But then, let them self-select, because maybe they'll be sitting there in the conversation room. They're like, man, I don't know. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes. I don't know what anybody's saying. And then maybe they'll drift over to the lessons part. But then the other is like, how can you get them to come? And so part of me, I always want like the best stuff and the nicest things. And, there's a real good idea, I think, that someone was talking to me about just the other day. Is, okay, so you've got beginning, intermediate, and advanced. And some people really don't like these terms. I understand. So we've been saying, like in Tlingit, we've been saying people who are at the edge of the water, people who are in the shallow water, people who are in the deep water. And part of it is humility. Like you don't really want to brag or, like, I'm an advanced, But then I think the other thing too is I think we've never really been clear about what those what's the differences. But then I also think that there should be something about hitting a certain level. And so maybe not everyone's into this, but I thought it was a great idea. Is if you had a tattoo that people could get when they got, say, like, you have reached a beginner. From my perspective, it takes an entire year of learning to really become a beginner. You do like the whole beginning Tlingit sequence and a whole bunch more, and then you've hit that beginner status. Everyone else is like not there yet. And even that term, I don't know if that's the right term either. But then you do that, then you do another year, and then you've hit this intermediate speaker status, where basically beginner means you can make most of the sounds, if not all of them. You can memorize a whole bunch of stuff. You can be fairly sometimes communicative, but you can really only do stuff that you've memorized. So if some people try to go outside of that realm, you kind of can't follow them. you also might not be able to really initiate your own conversations about things, and you might not be able to talk about things that you've never talked about before. An intermediate speaker, you're not doing memorization. You're starting to put the language together. You might have some difficulty with modes or tenses or however your language works, but you can do an awful lot, and you can also respond to situations with not memorize things, but be able to put things together and start to sort of talk about things that you've never talked about before. Like maybe you've never talked about the salmon cycle and how it works, but you can give it a darn good shot and try and put those things together. And then there's advanced, and advanced is sort of like you can really start to flow with the language, and you can, when people are talking, you can understand at least most of what's being said. Maybe not the exact details and stuff. You might not be able to translate it very accurately, but you're able to follow along pretty close. You can also start to move into some of the more sort of challenging parts of the language, especially a lot of verb-driven languages. You might be able to do quite a bit more. And at least you know some of the things that are going on in there. But just trying to think like, what is the thing that people get? Because it feels like if we came up with this set of like these elite things, and we have a tattoo artist here among us, but if there was like this limited thing, and maybe it's a tattoo, maybe it's something different, maybe it's a jacket, but it's like it's only available for the people who hit this certain status. I think it'd be way cool because then you sort of, at least on the Northwest Coast, we are status-driven people. Like you were this thing, you were that thing, and so we're all about kind of leveling up. So what do you folks? What are we going to give them? What are we going to give them access to?
Ermine skin for like a shakiat.
Yeah, right.
I don't know, a ring to go on a hat.
Hook-Yuns, did you?
There's a lot of money. I think some brass and copper and metal bracelets stuff. I think, anything that just that people can see and they'll know what it means. I think if we have something that is hidden and, it's just not out there. So we have celebration coming up. Our graduates, what are they going to be wearing? And so it's for that too. It's something that shows everybody that you're a speaker.
Yeah, I'm right there with that, and bracelets and jewelry of a certain type, or perhaps blanket, yeah, because of course I'm super happy about the idea of tattoos, but I know more than anybody, it's people come up to me and like apologize to me and be like, I don't have any, it's not for me. And that's okay. That's okay. That's part of it, actually. but yeah, so as long as there's a great alternatives to, bracelets are a great one too, because there's the Adele, or the history that the bracelets and even the way they're formed was, since we couldn't have our proper tattoos anymore, at least we had that representation, and the reason they're cuffed the way they were is to take them off quickly when they weren't to be seen. So that one lends really well to it as well. Or like I said, like a button blanket, or there's a couple different ways that maybe that one would just be for certain things that would just be for the ceremony to celebrate achievement. Yeah, I love it.
Okay, so we can't force people to get tattoos, I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah. No, I don't want to. God, it feels like I'm doing it half the time when it's their idea. It feels like I'm forcing it on them. I don't want to get anywhere near. Yeah.
Advanced speaker gets like a huge back tattoo, like get sit for 7 hours or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe.
Run out of space. Although too, with tattooing, just in that history of when there would be that forced ceremony of somebody already had, if they had in some of the things that I've read, if somebody already had achieved the thing, or they already had the tattoo, but were to be celebrated the same way again, they would do all the same ceremony and then paint over it, like just go over it a different way, like but all the ceremony leading up to it and everything else, the payment and everything else is
Do like
would
any type of thing, if that's an option. Like if you don't want
yeah, that's what I mean. Like it could be even a ceremonial semi-permanent option as well. So
well,
yeah.
so okay, so maybe yeah, so maybe there's a tattoo option or a paint option, and then there's also some sort of physical thing for each level. I think that would be really great. Like you get like a hat for as a beginner, and you get like a something that's not. There's gonna be more who reach that level than you're gonna get less intermediate and then even less advanced. And so I think there should be, I think it should be like pretty serious when you start getting up to advanced. Like it should be like a, I think it should be like a full on like something that's one of a kind. I don't know how we do that because then you're potentially talking like $1,000 per person, but I think it's worth it. I think it's also, it's this statement saying like, we are re-envisioning what we value because we value all these other things and we have to put this value back onto our language, not because we have devalued it, but because people have systemically devalued our languages. And so maybe, and it can't be something that anybody can just go buy. Like it has to be this, like in the College of Hawaiian Language, they put out these new shirts every year. And I was like, yeah, I'll take one of those shirts. They said, no, you got to be in the college. I'm in the college, but they didn't believe me. I had to go get my teacher and say, tell them I'm in the college. Tell them I'm in the program. And then like, yeah, he's in the pro. So, and then I had this shirt and I felt cool because I was on the inside, but I know I'm also sensitive to the fact that some of our people are going to get upset because they'll be like, well, they think they're so much better than us, and blah, blah, blah. And we got to sort of push back against that and say, no, 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 no. We just said everybody should do this. And when you do this, we're going to recognize the work. And, and I like the idea. So we'll have these exclusive tattoos where it's like, so if someone goes to Hakuin's consensus, okay, I'm gonna get this tattoo, he'll call up the language advisors, be like, did they hit this level? So or maybe there's some kind of secret, like we give them a little code or something like that. But for Tlingit, I thought the advanced one should be uh, in the Tlingit verb dictionary. There's these basket designs, um, and I want to do the front cover on the left arm and then the inside cover on the right arm. So it's like cover to cover. Like I've done the verb dictionary, right? And so I think that would be the pinnacle. I don't know what the intermediate and the beginner ones would be. But I think, yeah, so like names, tattoos, regalia, like so like maybe the beginner thing, it's like sort of like a jacket or something that's not like necessarily a one of a kind thing. And then for the intermediate, it's a little bit more, maybe it's something like a sealskin vest or something like that. And then for the advanced, it's like, it's really big time, like a blanket or a hat or something. But I think also like if we had a series of artists who were just making this stuff, like, and we would certainly pay them, but I think there's some artists that I could think of who would really be on board with supporting the language movement by saying, yeah, putting this stuff on there.
Yeah, if we're talking long-term visions and those types of plans of these kinds of things, then this would be the things that our artists are apprenticing our jewelry makers and carvers and weavers and regalia makers, and to be generating back into this cycle. It'd be great.
And it'd be good to see, like, how could this idea be replicated? So in Upiaq, it'd be a whole different set of things, right? Or if you're looking at Tehinag, or if you're looking at Koikan or Deniina. But I feel like there's sets of things. So like a similar idea where here's something you can, and all of us though had these various sort of ways to recognize stages of growth. And so it's just sort of formalizing that for your language program. And then, and there's this fine line here too, but I think We just gotta celebrate the heck out of, like, when someone does it, like, don't make it just like another day of the week. Like, really do something and really bring those folks forward. And I think we hold back on that ourselves because I think maybe there's part of us that says, well, I don't want other people to feel left out. But I think there's this other part that says we don't deserve that. And I think we gotta sort of blast that out and just really take the roof off this. And we won't make fun of people who get the temporary tattoo. It's okay, it's your skin. Other thoughts?
I was just laughing at that because that was the first thing I pictured when you said non-permanent. I didn't picture henna.
Just go scrub it off. Okay. Fabulous. So coming back, let me share a couple of strategies that I've heard about for language immersion. And really what you're trying to do is keep people from speaking English. And so I have been told things, I've been chewed out before. I've been told that I'm the boarding school now, which I'm like, okay, I recognize how you feel, but I don't think so. But this idea that to create a language immersion environment is somehow oppressive. And it's an interesting thing. Like for you, if you're going to be the one who's going to tell everybody to stop speaking English, you're going to have to go around and listen in on what people are doing and correct and nudge them back into the language if you can. There was this one time we went to Glacier Bay for an immersion. And it just kind of spontaneously happened. They put out an oatmeal can. So you got to put money in here if you want to speak English. And then it just so happened I had some cash, not a whole lot, but I had like some ones and fives, tens, maybe a couple 20s. And then what I realized is after a while I ran out of ones, so I had to put $5 in there. I remember one time Nora Dowenhauer stood up and she said, "Touchdown, I don't got any money." So I put $5 in the can for her. And then she spoke all in Tlingit. And she got done and said, "Can I get my money back?" And then we all just laughed. They all just laughed at me, but they didn't give me my money back. But maybe what you do, I've got two versions of this. One that I thought of, it's sort of like when you start the game that teaches kids to be cutthroat capitalists, Monopoly, and you say you're going to get 5 20s and 5 5s, but you give everyone like $500, or everybody who attends the thing, or whatever the number is that you can afford. But you give them to them in certain amounts of bills. So you got 5 $1 bills, then you got $5 bills. What's that? Okay, and then they have to pay a fine if they start speaking English. And so maybe the first time it's $1, and the 6th time it's $5. But then they're not paying their own money. That's just saying the less English you speak, the more money you get to take home. But then the key is what if someone's like, okay, I'll just shut my mouth for 3 days, right? Which is not what you want either. So can you encourage them to keep speaking but to not use English? Then I was talking to a colleague who had a great idea, I thought. And he was saying, because he works in media and television and news, and he says, what if we did like a reality show? I was like, oh, like Survivor or something, where you get voted off the island if you use, they're speaking English, you gotta kick them off the island. And I was like, that's kind of a cool idea. And then he said, I was like, and the ones who stay, they get some kind of prize or something? He's like, yeah. I was like, you mean like $1,000? He's like, no, they get like $20,000 or something. Like, what if it was some kind of substantial thing? Like I don't know. I don't know if those things are sustainable. You probably have to make the reality show. But we're pretty good at drama. I'm sure we can come up with enough drama to keep people tuned in. But there could be things like that. So it's like you can get this amount of money, and a lot of our programs are just scraping by. So it's not like we can afford to give everyone 10 grand or whatever. But also, at some point, we're going to have to start putting significant money towards these things. And maybe it's you get entered into a drawing, and then there's some sort of something at the end of it. So those are a couple of things. So sort of like a punishment system and then an incentive system, and trying to combine those things. Because you want people talking, but you also want them to not use English when you're kind of trying to move towards these immersion times. When I asked the folks at the Navajo how they did it, they said when kids are first getting started, they don't have to do anything. Like they have this whole network. Like we found this in the language nest too. Like we never told kids not to speak English. We just kept speaking to them and they just kind of switched over after a while. But when you start getting into older level schools, and then, you know, if you are a parent of a child and you want that child to just speak the language, like when that child decides to rebel against you, they're going to do it with English, right? So it's really interesting to consider that. But so I was talking to some, and they said when they would catch people speaking English in the school, they'd say, "Oh, you want to speak English, huh? Great." And then they would give them an article from National Geographic, and they would make them rewrite the article. But again, like, so that's a punishment. But then in other areas, I saw that they would give them a baseball cap and say, "Put your baseball cap on, and then you could speak English during the English class, where we're teaching you the English language through Hawaiian." So stuff to consider. Like English is going to take over. It just once it comes in to the space, it just has a tendency to take over. And then for a lot of your learners, it's probably a lot easier for them to, because they can just communicate without a whole lot of thought, whereas you want them to sort of really push themselves into this environment. Any other thoughts? What are you going to do? What's your strategy going to be?
We have, I don't know if Hakeem said this yet, but we have immersion sessions in the Juneau Shemalia Learners Group every Saturday, usually for the last hour. And Shagop usually facilitates it. He asked, that's not me crying, that's my dog, who wants to speak, and he'll put us in order. And when it's time to go, he'll say Shemalia again. It's time to talk now. And we usually have a signal for when we're done, like Deutschen Newsome. Usually the beginners, they'll stick to what they know, like introducing themselves or something. I always found that it's the advanced speakers that will bust into English where they want to teach us something, like Cherry or David Boxley. They'll use it kind of as a lesson. They're like, okay, and this is, and it kind of ruins the whole thing where they're speaking English. But Shagop, the way he addresses it, he'll usually, if it's a bigger thing, he'll call them personally and tell them not to do that anymore. And I think people are pretty okay with his leadership, or they'll just like, all right, okay, I won't do that anymore. So it usually works out where he's just the one who's dealing with it, not everybody like stop speaking English.
Yeah, because that's, you know, we had that language gathering 2 or 3 years ago in November, and we had to have it. I was like, are we going to just cut their microphone if they won't stop? Which is a pretty tough thing, because I do think for a teacher, it's very natural to just switch over to be like, oh, let me explain how this verb works. And then when you conjugate it this way, then you get this thing. And we can just move into that, which is honestly probably easier for everybody, but you're gonna have to do the hard stuff. And the other part is the cultural explanation. It's like, oh wait, let me shift over and tell you how this whole cultural thing works, and to just, but it just reintroduces English as the medium, right? And so what becomes difficult then is your language is not the language of communication. And so to continue to push it and push it and push it, it's like, this is the language of communication. And I don't know how we're going to get there, because, and these are things I'm going to have to figure out as a language teacher myself. Because when I studied in Hawaii, like as soon as they realized you were studying Hawaiian, they did not want to speak to you in English anymore. And that's the thing is like if you know each other and you both know the language, why would you use English with each other? Which is tough, right? Which it's tough because then you got to kind of redefine yourself a little bit. I mean, you just kind of have to. And then also, like, what do you do if someone else comes into the picture? You're gonna leave out their partner, or you're gonna leave out the mutual friend of you guys, and so those are pretty tough things to negotiate to really like if these languages are going to have a future, we are going to have to redefine some of our roles. And Fishman, he talks about this a little bit, and let me see if I've got a, I think I have a graphic for this thing. Maybe it's somewhere else. Hold on. So here's another sort of concept for us to think about. So we have domains, right? So the domain is the place, the social or the physical place where the language might be used, right? So family, work, education, religion, entertainment, media, politics, commerce, sports, food and medicinal harvesting, whatever the thing is. And so there, like, if you have a large enough community, like let's say in Juneau, there's 15, 20 people who are studying Smalgich. That's a large enough community to do a lot of things. Like, could you folks, for example, contact a restaurant or a coffee company or something and say, yeah, there's like 30 of us, and we would like to take over, we'd like to rent the whole facility for lunchtime, and we would like to have lunch in our language. Could you folks do that and just sort of let us take over like a whole place? And I think something like that would be really neat. And then also, like, what do people like to do? Do they play basketball? Do they uh, play board games? Do they, you're gonna have to manufacture a whole bunch of these new places where people are going to use the language. It will never be enough to just have classes once or a couple times a week. That just will not be enough to create people who have high fluency and very deep cultural knowledge. You're going to have to create some of those spaces, and some of them are going to just be building the community and building this whole new sort of part of your own society. But then part of that is also going to be like doing the deeper language stuff, like practice with the big speeches and practice with the big stories and have those sort of opportunities. But then other times it's going to be more casual and just sort of building the network. So the registers are like what you need to be able to talk about that. Like if you don't know how to talk about playing cribbage in the language and doing all the things that you need to do, like how you count the cards and how you score the points and how you talk to trash or whatever you do, then you're going to have to sort of figure out how to do that so that you can practice all that stuff before going in. If you're going to have a fish camp, you're going to have to know how to say, cutting dry fish, cutting naiadi, clean the gut and leave the tail, cut this like that, cut these things off, put this here, put that there, dump this back in the river. There's a whole bunch of stuff you're going to need to figure out how to say. So the idea is like think of the domain and now create all of the language that you need to. Like, don't not create it, but harvest it, get it together, teach it to the whole group. So you have this very intensive lesson on this specific task. Go do the task, make note of all the things you figured out you don't know how to say, go back, fortify the register, continue to teach it, and then eventually you do that stuff enough times and then you could cut fish entirely in the language. And you could smoke fish, you could do all the things, all the things. But this other part is role relations. And I think that's something we haven't really talked about a whole lot in here. So there are hierarchies: parents, siblings, children, clan members, employees, employers, congregants, students, teachers, administrators, customers, service providers. Like, you could have nieces and nephews teaching aunties and uncles. And that's going to be difficult. That's going to be challenging for everybody, because to correct somebody or to sort of guide them along, and sometimes these things are going to have to be talked about, and they're going to have to be sometimes challenged or set aside, and to say, okay, yes, so we have all of these things at how it's supposed to be, but if the language isn't there, then sometimes we have to sort of challenge some of those things or set them aside for a little bit, but then build them back up. Any thoughts on that?
This is Sonny. So are you saying that all this would be done prior to the immersion? So like it's like a boot camp? So we have some these clumps or clusters of words and can fit in easier? Just a
Right.
quick question.
Yeah, so let's say you're facilitating an immersion. Like usually you are going to talk about some of the activities you're going to do. And then and there might be a smaller group that goes for is okay, we're going to do drum making in the language. Okay? But that means we need to make sure we know how to say all the steps and all we have to think of everything. Everything. Stretch the hide, pull it over, pull it tight, tie the knots in the center. Whatever the things are, you're going to have to sort of envision all the things that you might have to say to people. Then you get all that stuff together, and then the immersion starts. And then you have some times where you're probably using English. You say, okay, let's go over all these phrases. We need to practice. And so the immersion's yours. So it could be done however you want. Uh, if you got a big, huge language movement, you've been doing this a long time, then maybe as soon as everybody gets there, the English, you guys are just done, 100% done with English. But maybe it's not there yet. So maybe what you're doing is you say, okay, we're going to use English for half an hour, then we're going to use our language for an hour, then we're going to use English for half an hour. So it's almost like how a seal or a sea lion swims. They keep poking their head up, poking their head up. So you might have to do that. And so it's totally fine. It's your thing. But if you're not making speakers, you have to always continually examine what you're doing and then figure out how you're going to sort of re-envision it. And so I think it's totally fine to come in and have a bunch of stuff and then smash through a whole bunch of lessons. And then it could be if you have a language community that's pretty advanced already, you might just have to say, okay, here, everybody take a look at this for half an hour, and then let's just start it. And they could do some self-study, because if they looked at it, they'd know how to say it. And then you just sort of go. But you might have to do some question and answer, and then do the activity, and then come out and say, okay, how did it go? What did you realize you don't know how to say? What do you need to know how to say? And this just sort of, because learning a language and using a language, if you could really just do the thing that you're studying, I think it makes it so much easier.
One of the things that inhibits us from speaking as adult learners is there's like a specific awkwardness that takes place between two people who are not fluent. So it's different for me if I'm trying to speak to Khane or Kanak or Kyotish or Kanak, because I know that they're going to overlap between, areas where I wasn't quite right. Their knowledge is going to overlap that, and they'll be able to catch me and respond. Whereas one of my classmates and I were talking, and we've made a decision. We want to start speaking to each other more in Tlingit. But like I said, there's a specific awkwardness where it's like, I'm not totally sure about what I'm saying to you, and you're not totally sure what I'm trying to say or what I'm saying. And so it was good for us to work through that. Like that's where we're at in our growth and our speaker relationship now, where I asked them something like, I want to ask you about your work. And they were like, say it again. And I said it again. And, it was really slowed down. It was the most awkward conversation. And I said something like recorder 10, and they went and got a camera. They weren't sure what I was trying to do. And then we just sort of worked through it. And then I ended up saying, after we switched to English, I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. But I think I think that means I want to ask you. And they're like, oh, that's what you're asking. So now that we've gone through that, I feel like it's going to be a little bit easier next time because we're like, okay, phew, got that awkward hurdle out of the way. You know, we know how to get through that now. We don't have to just, stay silent with each other. So that helped.
Okay. And we have done stuff in immersion environments where we say you can write to each other in English, right? So that you could write it down and stuff. Um, and again, it's always like this interesting thing because it's like, well, then everybody just stops talking and they're just sitting there writing little notes with each other. But then it's sort of like, as you sort of get there, and I found like within this role relations, there's this other thing that Fishman kind of talks about too, which was pretty wild, which is like sometimes these roles have to be redefined, right? Which is really interesting because like so much of there's like sometimes an existing friendship or an existing kinship and these other things, but it's all based on like English, I know English, and even though we're communicating about cultural stuff, like now we have to do this through the language, and now it's going to have to be reevaluated because there could be gaps, there could be all kinds of different things that sometimes happen there, and so as we sort of look at this kind of stuff, part of what I think sometimes stops people from doing this is once you start to use the language, you start to find out all the gaps that you have. But I think that's actually a good thing because you could stay in your comfort level by like saying, okay, learn this thing, now learn this thing, now learn this thing, now learn this thing. But if you said, okay, now just use it, use the thing. And it's sort of like, it's like you've just been talking about like driving a car, but you've never done the thing. And then you get into the car and it's like, well, I don't know because, but it's also interesting too because like to set English aside and say, okay, now we're going to use this language as our medium. I think you're going to find a whole bunch of stuff that you're not sure how to say or you're not sure what to do if somebody doesn't understand what you're saying, which is always interesting to me because then it's like, well, do you pull it back? Do you keep repeating it? Do you say it another way? And as we go for these, and I think part of the problem is we don't have enough environments where this actually happens, where we have to learn how to function in this environment. But this is where perhaps the where your keys and the other things can sometimes come in to be like, I didn't understand what it was that you said. And then also to sort of to be in that and I've been in that situation plenty of times where there's someone who's talking to me and I'm like, I don't know what they're saying. And sometimes it could be really frustrating and disheartening, but then to sort of push through to this point of communication, I do believe that it happens, but it's going to happen at this sort of community-wide level, and there's got to be sort of like you're saying, where there's people all at these different levels of language knowledge, like some of the elders like way up there in the stratosphere, and then you got some folks who are down on the ground just trying to get their little baby bird wings to go. But then you're going to have this sort of, if there's a large enough group that's committed to doing it, they can usually sort of help each other. But like, that's probably, for me, I guess, two of the hardest things to do is to create those use environments and to get enough people to just talk. Those are two things I'm always challenged about and trying to think is how am I going to get people to talk? Other thoughts?
Mr. Sonny, I'm sorry, I'm cooking as I'm listening, but humor is really great. I think giving yourself permission to make mistakes and just laughing and joking around, I think for the immersion part, that really kind of bridged that discomfort.
Yeah, I think so. And to have stuff that people can do. Yeah, and so it's always an interesting thing for me to think about like, okay, we're going to have conversations, and then we're going to have some activities. So we've tried a whole bunch of things. Like, so Shenwa Dekat, Nay Brown had this great idea where she wrote a whole bunch of conversation topics on popsicle sticks. And so a table, people would sit down at these tables, and then they would just draw one, and then they'd sort of, it'd have the Tlingit on one side and then English on the other. And so then that's what the group had to talk about, because this is the other thing too, is sometimes we're really forcing it or manufacturing conversation, because we've got a group of people who are interested in the language, but those might not be people who hang out with each other all the time. And so sometimes you have to push them to talk about things. And then also to keep them from falling back to just introducing themselves or talking about stuff that they're super familiar with. So I thought that was a really neat idea. And then sometimes we would break into teams, and we would use English and Tlingit, and we'd say, okay, you guys all have to tell the funniest story that you can. And we'd try and really laugh at each other and just have fun with it and just go. And then they would have time to put it together, and then they would come forward and read it for all of us. We've done reenactments of stories. We all got to study like a Raven story, and then we all reenacted it in front of people, and like we broke into teams to do different sections of it. We've made drums, we've cut fish, we've done translation work. Sometimes there's a set of pictures, they're called totem storyboards, which the history of it, it's really like for, I think, linguists who are doing specific language work, and they want to elicit specific things. Like, so they want to try and get, let me pull one of them up so I can show you. Let's see. So some of them are kind of silly, but the sort of intention behind it is they're trying to usually get a specific thing, like they're trying to figure out how doubt works and how you communicate doubt in the language. So usually it's someone who works in languages who's trying to find something and pull it out of the language. But then we started using these as sort of like, okay, look at these pictures. So here's picture 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And as we go through these, so one is you give everyone, there's no English, like you could print these in different ways you want to. I print them with no English, and so I just give them the pictures, and I say, okay, look at all these pictures. Don't use English, come up with a story. And so basically, it's kind of a silly thing. Like, so this person is going to go on some sort of trip, asks a friend if they can watch their animal, which is named Fluffy. And then they said yes, but then they go to the store, and then they don't know, is it a dog or a cat or a rabbit? I don't know what Fluffy is. So they think about these things and buy different types of food that they think the animal might need. And in the end, it turns out to be a snake, right? And then the snake eats all of the things and is happy. So it's kind of a silly thing, but I kind of like that they're silly, because then it's just sort of elicits some unusual language. And we've done these before where when we used to have language gatherings in the interior, we were very fortunate that sometimes we'd have 7 or 8 like highly fluent elders who were hanging out with us, and they'd have a lot of fun with things like this. And especially if you can do this sort of thing where you say, okay, let me explain the process, this is what we're going to do, and now once we start, there's no English allowed. You have to figure out how to create this story yourselves. So sometimes there's things like these which I think can be really helpful, and they could be kind of fun, and then you could make your own, and so there's a whole bunch of different things you could do, and some of these could be based on your narratives from your culture. Like these could be Raven stories, or you could do one for Kakachgook or Duptut, the strong man, or the person who got waylaid in Hawaii a long time ago. And so these are things that you can do also, just trying to think of like activities. Another activity that we did one time was we had a hockey bag full of stuffed animals, and they were all local stuffed animals. So it was like a moose and a squirrel and a porcupine and a whole bunch of stuff that were all just things you would find in the area. So not like pigs and cows and sheep, local animals that people had knowledge of. So then we broke everybody into groups, and we had someone go up and pick an animal without showing anybody, go back to their group, and then they had to write 5 descriptive sentences about that animal and try and get us to guess what animal that they had. But if they had to use the least obvious things first. So if it's a beaver, you wouldn't lead with these 2 front big teeth, but you can lead up to there. That could be like sentence 4 or 5. And so it was really fun to sort of do that as well, to push people to be descriptive and then also to push people to think about narratives and storytelling and how to do that kind of stuff. Okay. So the other thing is about a month from now, you're going to turn in a final paper. This is what I want your final paper to be. I want you to write your own personal 30-year vision for the language that you're working in. So I know we had talked about short-term, medium-term, long-term plans. And I don't want you to necessarily think about this part, but when you get out there and you're doing language work, like what is a language plan? How is it going to be revisited? How is it going to be updated? Who's involved in creating the plan? Who's involved in updating that plan? At some point, you got to have this smaller group who's probably making a lot of the key decisions. The other thing is like, what are some of the things that you're trying to sort of change, right? For example, in 30 years from now, we want people to have conversations in our language. And that means there are probably some behavioral things that you're going to have to adjust. You're going to have to create and facilitate some of these shifts. The bigger sort of questions I have is like, so if I'm thinking of these chunks, I think right at the beginning, I want to see your statement in 2050, blank language will have blank number of speakers. We will create these speakers by developing these programs. So that's where I want you to start with. Number of speakers, what kind of programs you're going to be developing. These could be language nests, language schools, adult programs, classes in the university, classes in the communities. And don't think about resources in terms of money and who's going to do it and how. Don't cap yourself with the sort of restrictions that I think capitalism likes to place on things, this game of finite resources. But instead, just think about the things. Okay, like this, and don't think about like, okay, if I can just convince these people that, no, just like, we're going to put you in charge. We're voting you as president of the universe for 30 years. And if you were in charge, like this is what you would do. And don't worry about the logistics of how that would happen. If you start thinking about money and curriculum, you can get stuck. Because I think those 2 things exist so that you will get stuck. I think they exist to say the people in power will stay in power by pretending that they're the only ones who know what needs to happen. And so I reject all forms of those discussions while considering a plan. And I think you should as well. But part of it is like, what are some of the language resources that you need? Do you have a functioning dictionary? Do you have a grammar? Do you have a handbook? Do you have audio? Do you have video? Do you have apps? Do you have websites? And if not, how are you going to create those things? And if you do, how are you going to manage those things? How are you going to create access? How are you going to protect them if you need to? So those are some things. It's like resource and access to them. If you don't have a dictionary, how are you going to make it? If you don't have a grammar, how are you going to make it? These are the institutions. I would like you to address the institutions. So we've talked about this. Where can languages and how can languages be taught? Well, let me make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. I want to make sure I understand the question. What would the handbook drive? What do you mean by that question?
So what would the handbook encompass? Where would it, who would the audience be? What does it do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is not, I think it's going to be too much pressure if I tell you, you're going to write the plan and we're going to give it to the people. So this is a chance for you. This is going to be you describing your own vision. So this would be like, okay, let's say if we had the ability to just press pause and put you in charge. Okay, you have 30 years to do it.
Okay.
So it's really, it's kind of a fictional exercise, but it is a good opportunity because I do believe every language should have a 30-year plan. And I think, but developing consensus and sort of, I wrote one for Tlingit, I don't know, but that was a big part of my dissertation was a 30-year plan. But don't go read mine and then just go, what would you do? What would you do? And so it is really good practice though, because if the opportunity comes up, because I do think, even though every language has its own multiple communities and there's sometimes conflicting ideologies, what should be happening, and I hear all kinds of stuff. People say, well, they really need to be doing more at the university. It's like, okay, we'll do more. And then some people say, well, it's not the university, we need to get it into the home. It's like, okay, let's go to the home. So, but just in terms of like this, trying to really think of a big picture. And the big thing is like, I want you to state the goal by the year 2050. For example, if I were to say it, by 2050, the Tlingit language will have 1,000 speakers. If that was my goal, now I need to say how we're going to get there. Okay? So here's and you don't have to have all of this stuff either. But here's the things we've talked about: higher education, high school, middle school, elementary school, preschool, family. So that's sort of one side of the sort of things. This is what we're looking at. Where and what levels will the language exist within all of these things? Is it going to be taught at the university? Is it going to be taught in high school, middle school, elementary school, preschool? And you might have, every language is going to be different. There might be a situation where you say it's in every school in this community. And then every other community has a little bit, but this was something I was sort of wondering, like if we had someone who seemed like they had really good language skills and they're from another community, would we then, if we built a language medium school, would we have like a boarding school next, even though that's a horrible word, but would we have like a dormitory where the students can live? Because we say, okay, you want to come learn, come learn. Then sort of thinking of like the depth of the program. I think an English medium school that has a colonial model is the most common school in Alaska. And I think it's the most difficult one to create speakers in. But then you can have an English medium school that is culturally based from an indigenous culture. That makes it a little easier. Then you can have an immersion program, which is sort of like, so the key with an immersion school or program is what you're saying is the students don't know the language, so we're going to teach them in this immersion environment. Dual language would mean we spend half of our day in language X and half of our day in language Y. It doesn't have to be an exact half, but we spend a significant time with our language as the medium of education, like in Navajo. Like you can read even more than what we read this week about Navajo dual language schools. Then there's a language medium school like in Hawaii and Aotearoa, where they say, once you cross this threshold, you leave your English behind all day long. So those are sort of like, that's a guarantee. You'll create speakers. This is not a guarantee, but it's pretty likely. This, maybe. This, probably not. This, definitely not. Not on its own, right? So we have to consider those things as well. Like as you go further down here, the likelihood increases. But you can't have that. And even though we're saying the sky's the limit, but the limit is also the sky, right? So what that means is you can't, if your 30-year plan is to convert every single school into a language medium school, okay, great. But I don't know if you're going to be able to do that. Maybe. But then you have to sort of lay out like, how? What's the process of doing that? These are pretty big picture things. And I don't, this is not like your dissertation or your thesis. It's the end of the semester paper. If it's 10 pages long, that's pretty good. If it's 20 pages long, that's maybe a little better. But don't think it has to be like 100 pages or anything crazy like that. It's your chance to do a visioning session for your language without having, nobody's going to judge you. Nobody's going to judge you on this. You don't have to sell it to anybody. I'm going to read it. I'm going to give you some feedback, but most of that feedback is going to be like, yeah, let's do this thing, and then here's some strategies, right? So these are the things that I'm thinking of as well. How is the language documented? And how are you going to document the language? If you have like 30 speakers left, are you going to be able to record them quick enough? Are you going to be creating children who are first language speakers? Because if you do, that's a pretty good guarantee. How are you going to create an economy around the language? Like, how are you going to lift it up so it has prestige? We talked about this. How are you going to have a self-sufficient program? So it's not just, well, we didn't get the grant, so now the program's dead. You don't want that. But then there's other monies out there too. How are you going to normalize the language so that speaking it is not an exception? We talked about that quite a bit today. What are you going to do? Well, this is a goal of 6 language nests through 12th grade school. So like how many of these things, like you're going to have a language nest in these different communities and then maybe have one, it depends. Every language is going to be different. Maybe Inupiaq has 10 language nests and then 2 schools that go K through 6 and then maybe 1 school that goes 7 through 12 or whatever the grades are working these days. But the higher you go with the school, the harder it is. That's a fact. So it might be something, maybe you envision something where there's like a hub, there's a language hub, which some people aren't going to like, but again, you're not showing this to the board, you're not sending this to the corporations, you're not revealing this on the stage of the Alaska Federation of Natives. You just have a chance to brainstorm. And then maybe there's a future where you sort of take this sort of idea and this brainstorming and make it a reality. Because the whole goal of what we're trying to do here and with this whole program and with our work is to make sure that we have thousands of speakers of our languages in the future. Languages now, languages forever. Here we had another brainstorm. This was from this class. Having separate college classes for content. So if you got beginning, intermediate, and advanced already, what's next? A story class, a class on spirituality, a class on hunting and fishing and making food, like content courses, right? A class on modern society and traditional values or whatever the thing is. It's your vision, run with it. How are you going to approach social media and mass media? Like it'd be great to have like 15 minutes of, like, let's say Could you do a nightly sort of 15-minute recap of the news and the weather for your community? Could you, just stuff to sort of make it a language of wider communication. Any questions so far?
I started writing my paper from the perspective of 2050, and I started writing it as this happened, this is how it happened, because it helps me envision a little bit better somehow if it's like I imagine that it already happened. But I can rewrite it under your framings for academic purposes if that's needed.
No, if you want, is like a kind of like a science fiction piece, or that's
Yes, exactly. It's historical fiction.
that's fine. Like, it is the year 2050. I've been speaking. Yeah, I mean, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to do. It's not like it has to be a cut and dry manual. Like if that's feeling boring to you, or whatever's going to help, because no matter where you're at and what you're doing, like to sort of say, okay, what's your 30-year vision? Tell me. Like that's an intimidating question. Like they're asking me in Hawaii, like where they built this, they built it all. And then they're saying, what you gonna do? That's what it felt like to me. Like, okay, what's your plan? Like, well, we're gonna do a class. You know, it's like I had no idea, but then it did help. And so the whole idea here is like you're in a no pressure environment here. There's no pressure to you got to do a thing, right? You can't just coast and you can't just um, wait until the Zoom is over. You got to do a thing, which means you've got to come up with this 30-year vision. But and I would like it to be a pretty big picture thing, like the entire language. And it's okay if we had 10 different people writing about the exact same language, we'd probably have 10 different plans. That's totally fine. Because the idea is for you to sort of take a look and say, okay, what would you do? What would you do? And maybe this is something you're going to revisit later and think, oh man, yeah, I've kind of thought of these things, but I should have thought of these other things. So it's totally fine. It's an exercise. That's all we do here is we look at what other people are doing, we keep talking about some of these factors that play a role in it, and we try it out ourselves. So some of the things that I've also been thinking about is like language ecosystems. That's up to you if you want to address that, but like in what ways is the language connected to all these different things? How has it been disconnected, and how are you going to reconnect it? Like reconnecting is a big part of our work. It's a huge, huge part of our work. Reconnecting individuals, reconnecting institutions, reconnecting the entire landscape to the language. Like we are up against it. But then sometimes like the collective really does help. And what I'd like us to do for our last class is just to reflect. How did it go? What do you think? And just do the thing, and everybody gets straight A's for doing cool stuff. That's how I like to do things. If you don't do this stuff, then we got this ugly, weird conversation we gotta have about why didn't you do the thing? Where you been? What's going on? The other thing I've been thinking about is like, not everybody's going to come at it with the same intensity. Not everybody's going to come at it with the same mission, vision. Not everybody's going to come at it with the same drive and energy. And it's not a value statement to say that. So you're going to have speakers, right? You probably have speakers now. So not every language does. There are some languages that don't have any speakers anymore. Then you're going to have learners. You have people who want to live with the language. You have some people who want to know about it. And then you might have some people who don't really want to know. Yeah, I'll make a PDF of this slideshow, and I'll send it out to folks through an email, along with some clarifying questions like this is exactly what I'm looking for. This is what you need to do, and you got a month to do it. Okay. But yes, I will do that. And then let's see. Don't worry about that one. Don't worry about that one. Let's see. Yeah, I think this was it. And I guess, you know, some of the bigger questions that I have is how are you going to motivate your people? How are you going to create, like, I think we can all agree that there needs to be a huge shift in day-to-day operations of people, right? The individuals, the collectives, however you want to examine it. How is that going to begin to shift? Because we can't keep things the same. We must change them if we want our languages to live. Yeah. 1 month to hero time. Pick out your outfit, sew it all together. You can't step into a phone booth anymore and change into your superhero outfit. I don't know what it is. I guess you just got to go into a outhouse or whatever. And then how are you going to create like high levels of fluency? Because that's the other thing, because we talked about all this stuff. There's this other reality too, where you probably got this huge pocket of learners that are just kind of stuck in between this intermediate and advanced land, or in between advanced and immeasurable. How are you going to keep pushing people up into these higher areas of language use? To truly recreate the situations that our ancestors were living in. There are some things we might not be able to recreate, but there's going to be a lot of things that we can. So those are your things to think about. Wednesday, we'll talk about the Paul Creek method. We'll also talk more about this and continuing to reflect on a few of these critical ideas, because we do have, let's see, I'll stop the share. The number of times we will meet. We will meet 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 classes left, and then our final meeting. So I want to make sure that we're feeling okay, that we're using the class time. We can use this as basically a lab time to sound off ideas, to practice things. Because I don't want you to feel like you have this assignment and now you get pushed out into the dark and you got to go figure out how to do it. Like, I really want this to feel collaborative and safe, and that I'm looking forward to hearing what you folks have to say. If anyone else wants to sign up for additional presentations, I will share that link again. There's the spreadsheet for folks who want to take a look at it. The master-apprentice program, the idea is just get a chance to go take a look and share some things that you could find. I know most of you have already gone at least once, but if you want to go again, go for it. And we'll be talking about Paul Creek on Wednesday. It's a pretty interesting method. And then we'll be talking about master-apprentice, adult immersion, and language medium schools. Oh, and I think dual language. What the hell am I doing? Okay, that's on the 6th. I gotta add another category. Okay. Folks are awesome. Thanks. We'll see you on Wednesday.
I'm a hoople.
Pune, can you tell me the English name of the person who is scheduled for adult immersion besides Suzuk?
Yeah, let me see.
I should have asked the group, but I didn't see the name on the screen either.